Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Kane's independent media production. Today, we are talking about Cutting Through the Mix 2.0. What if we need more presence in the mix? What can we do about it? First things first, if you haven't caught last week's episode where we got into this initial discussion about cutting through the mix, go back and watch that first because we're going to be referencing back to that a fair amount in this episode. We're going to tackle this from a couple of different angles today. We're both going to come from a direction of what to do without changing any of your equipment, without buying anything new, just you have your stuff, what can we adjust? Then we're going to move on to possibilities for swapping out some things, making some more invasive adjustments to the way our kits are working, all in furtherance of speaking through this mix that we're working in and not really cutting through anything. I know that I've had experiences where I was rehearsing or performing or even playing by myself where I felt like there was parts of what I was doing that were not speaking to me as clearly as other parts of the kit. And this leads us to a place of needing to adjust how we're playing the drum set itself. This is also true if we have band members that are struggling to hear part of the kit that maybe they need to lock into, or if an audience member or a friend who's hearing you perform discovers that they're struggling to hear you or another part of the band. It's important for us to remember that in a group of musicians, we are an ingredient as part of a larger sound. There's the instrument that is the drums or the guitar or the bass. There is also the instrument that is the collective band that's making the sound that constitutes the whole song. And we need to make sure that everyone is into that idea, that they are actively listening, and that you feel comfortable talking about the idea that we are making a group sound together in this ensemble, and we need to all be working toward that goal. Now, at this point, if you're still only concerned with cutting through this mix and not actually achieving a balanced sound with yourself or whoever you're playing with, then the battle is lost, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make music together. Performance decisions that we can make. No tuning, no different gear, just the things that we have. The overarching thing that we need to know in this situation and in any musical environment is that it comes down to high frequencies, low frequencies, and the speed of these frequencies. Simply put, high frequencies travel really fast and they cut through. Low frequencies travel really slow and they don't cut through much of anything. This means that inside of this drum set, we have a huge span of frequency ranges, and in our performance, we need to take that into account so that we can balance all of this and get an even presentation to whoever's listening to it. A while back, we made a video about mixing from the drum throne, and this is exactly what we're talking about today. If there's parts of the kit that are naturally much louder and much brighter and much more cutting, we need to make choices to make sure that those balance out with the parts that are a little more sluggish and rumbly so that it behaves like a singular instrument. Now, this can include something as simple as playing with the shank of the stick on the hi-hat rather than the top if you need the hi-hat to be more present. If you're playing snare drum and swinging rim shots all night, make sure you're hitting in the center of the drum and not off center because that's going to cut more. If the ride cymbal's not getting through, move your pattern to the bell. If you're not getting enough mileage out of the bass drum in this live situation, try burying the beater. If the sound is good, it's definitely going to cut more. You might run into situations where reorchestrating something, maybe from a recording when you move it to live performance, is going to need to happen. Just because that pattern in the verse was played on an 18-inch floor tom in the studio doesn't mean it needs to be played there live, and it might not cut through as well as if you played it on a smaller floor tom, moved it to the snare, or just found somewhere else to put that pattern. This speaks directly to another point of knowledge you need to have, which is the volume thresholds and the volume range of each part of your drum set. Snare, very wide, toms, a little bit less, ride cymbals live in another place. If we can understand all of these things, we can make intelligent decisions no matter the performing context so that the pattern that we're playing gets to the listener. A fantastic, relatively old exercise for checking out this exact thing is to choose a simple pattern, repetitive, play it on the set, and slowly either raise and lower the volume of one limb, or leave one limb alone and raise and lower the volume of the rest. This gets us into thinking about how each of these parts live inside of the groove and which parts will jump out at a certain kind of volume intensity. Something that you may discover from working on this exercise is that it's actually much easier to get something to stand out by lowering the volume of everything else rather than hitting the thing harder and harder and harder that you want to speak over everything else. This is exactly the same as in a band or ensemble performance. You can always try to get louder, but it's much more practical to bring the overall volume down so that there's headroom for the bits that need to jump out to have somewhere to do that. As much as we're talking like this all hinges on volume, it is really important also to know that the density of a certain level of volume is really what we're struggling with here. If there's no room overall, a single snare hit is very loud, but it's also very short. And if we are doing them constantly, there's not enough room in there for anything else to speak through it. Let's say that we are going to start changing some sounds on the kit. What choices can we make to try to achieve a more, let's not say cutting, but a more present sound? Rather than going deep on every single drum here, there are specific little things that we actually do here even in our own videos when we need to adjust these types of presence, and we're going to run down those. Number one, starting with the snare. A couple of things that we would do to have more presence in the snare drum is A, to make sure that it is making a resonant sound, that it's not choked out, because tone underneath is going to give us more presence in the mix rather than a really sharp pop on top with nothing underneath it to support that sound. This means backing off on the muffling, getting comfortable with some resonance and some overtones coming back at you off of the drum, because ultimately, especially if we have things like distorted guitars around or a larger ensemble that's got a lot of horns in it, things in the high end, those harmonics are going to blend in beautifully and also help the drum to be present in the mix. Secondarily, we also tend to lower the Reso head just a little bit and raise the batter head up just a little bit, which goes against a lot of common kind of colloquial ideas about what a cutting snare drum is, but it works for us 100% of the time. If you play music where you need a very cutting cross-stick sound that can match the volume of the drum itself, it is worth it to try out a die-cast batter hoop. It doesn't change the sound of the drum that much, but is really going to elevate the cross-stick, and it's worth looking into. When it comes to the toms, two things. Number one is let's pitch the overall sound of the drums up a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can still be in your comfort zone, but up away from flappy heads to where we're starting to get tone and sustain out of the drums. This is particularly significant for unmiked situations where you want to really project the tone of the drums and you're not getting any support from any electronics or a PA system. But I don't tune drums differently for situations where it is close mic'd. For clarity's sake and for articulation coming through the mix, moving to clear heads is going to make a significant difference if normally you lean on coated. This aspect also holds true for the snare drum. If you're not playing a lot of brushes, it's totally fine to use a clear snare drum batter head. It's not a bad thing at all, and it will get you more brightness, articulation, and clarity. The elephant in the room, because it's huge, the bass drum. Thing number one, again, I pitch the batter head up a little bit more than you might think because we want a little bit more tone out of there. But at the same time, lower the Reso a little bit. I'll probably, for modern things, put a little bit of a pillow in there, maybe a lot bit of a pillow, and then making sure that I have a couple of options for beater choices, something that's on the softer side like a felt, and something that's harder like a plastic or a wood, or a double-sided beater. If articulation in the attack is what we're looking for, then for sure I'll go for the hardest beater possible and then work back from there if it's turning out to be excessive. If I'm still struggling at my preferred tuning to get good articulation and impact out of the bass drum, I will turn to some of the patches that are out there on the market that are designed specifically to give us extra attack right at the strike zone on the batter head. A lot of those will also give you a little more of a lifeline on the head if you're really smashing into it. They'll add a little bit of protection to that really, really direct spot. Now, moving on to cymbals, generally speaking, we're living in a very high frequency range when we talk about cymbals. But within that span, we have very bright cymbals, very articulate cymbals. We also have very dark, very blendy, very trashy ones. There are good contexts for all of these, no holds barred. If you need a really bright, articulate, loud ride cymbal, there are Mega Bell rides out there that are made specifically for this. It's a valid sound, it's a tool, and that's what it's for. On the other hand, if you're playing in small places where you need articulate drum sounds like we talked about earlier, but you need the cymbals to blend, it's okay to put dark, thin, trashy, whatever euphemism, cymbals alongside these punchy drum sounds. And maybe the ultimate expression of this is starting to mix and match. Dark crash cymbals, bright ride cymbal, maybe really big hi-hats or really small ones. These will all, again, blend together in this upper range to give us the sound that we're looking for, provided that we understand how they're going to behave in the greater context so that we have a good place to start from to get the sound we need. Now is one of the rarefied times where we're going to talk about the benefits of having a variety of different options in your gear choices. They don't need to be any particular choices. This is more about what your preferences are, but having, for instance, some options in your hi-hats and not being limited to a single pair, or having some size choices in your crash cymbals depending on the room that you're going to be playing in. This all does come to bear when we're trying to make a good balanced sound, and something as simple as the room that you're going into is going to change how a lot of these things behave. So being able to make, again, game time decisions both in your playing and also your gear choices is going to inform your ability to make the sound that you need for that situation. Now, at this point, we could tell you what ply your toms need to be or why you need a bell brass snare drum instead of that acrolite or the Mega Bell ride, but the fact is that's a rabbit hole that we frankly don't need to go down. It's true that a bell brass snare is going to have a much higher volume ceiling than an aluminum with 8 lugs, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we need to understand instead is what gear do we actually need for the work that we're doing? And an acrolite may get you through everything you need. Maybe 2 sets of hi-hats, maybe a bright ride and a dark ride. We don't need to have one of everything, and more importantly, we don't need to worry that we don't have something. The idea that there's a right choice for every single little situation is how we end up with way too much gear that we don't understand and way too many tools that don't actually have a job. Ultimately, having the gear that you have, be it a lot or a little, is both about making the sounds you want and also an opportunity to understand how those tools can get you to the sounds that you're after. All right, that about wraps it up. Thanks so much for coming along with us on this mental experiment that we went on today. It's really important to keep these things in mind, and we hope that you're going to as well. Please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, come down and check out the Patreon below. There's a link beneath the video. We have lots of extra things over there. Cymbal series still going strong. And finally, now that we've talked about all the things you can do to be more present in the mix and be balanced, would love to know your experiences with that, what worked, what didn't, what changes you made, and if any of your band members made changes as well, that'd be interesting too.